activities, which reminds me that several of us in this club, or several of you, are scuba divers, which led me to wonder. Isn't that clever? Why do scuba divers go into the water by falling backwards out of the boat? Because if they fell forwards, they'd fall back into the boat. So today, I know you're waiting for this one. Today is National Neither Snow Nor Rain Day. This commemorates the opening of the New York Post Office on September 7th of 1914. And you probably heard the inscription over the building. Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. And with that, we will start the meeting with America. Today.
Thank you. It's always tough to follow your act. Just take a few seconds to reflect with me, if you will. I'd like to share with you a quote from Bob Kerrey, former Nebraska governor. He says that unexpected kindness is the most powerful, most underrated agent of human change. Kindness that catches us by surprise brings out the best in our natures. So with everything going on around us, don't wait for a natural disaster to perform your next act of kindness. Thank you.
And Stacy Hammond has our guest introductions today.
We have several guests at today's meeting. I would request that all guests, as they're introduced, please stand up and remain standing until all guests are introduced. Our first guest to be introduced today is Marlou Wagner. She is here from the Topeka South Rotary Club visiting us. Welcome, Marlou. Stand up. Oh. David Beck also has a guest.
My guest is Claudio Duramo. He is an exchange student 3 years ago, sponsored by our club. He is from Torino, Italy. He's visiting for a couple of weeks.
Hey. Hurst Kaufman has a guest.
I'm pleased to have my guest Thane Burnback, who is in private wealth management affiliated with Northwestern University.
Frank Lynn has a guest.
My guest today is Ryan Minnis. He's a development officer for Great Life Golf and Fitness.
And Jim Blanker has a guest.
My guest is Sandy Orange. She's our Chief Financial Officer and Executive Vice President of Easter Seals Capital Foundation. Glad to have her.
Okay, would everyone please extend a warm welcome to all our guests.
Thank you, Stacy, and yes, we're so glad that you're here. Our month's featured charity for Cup Money is Kansas Children's Service League. This has been around for 120 years and has advocated for children by collaborating with public and private agencies to prevent child abuse, strengthen families, and empower parents and youth. This impacts the lives of over 40,000 children and families every year, so please do give generously. We have a number of announcements today. First of all, we asked last year for you to consider giving toward hurricane relief and Hurricane Harvey relief. And Linda can still accept checks and she can accept credit cards today if you're interested. And I just want to let you know that our club has already donated $1,225, which exceeds our $5 per member recommendations. But we're not finished, because Irma is on the way, and all of the money you donate will go to hurricane relief. The Topeka Water Festival, which many of you have volunteered for in the past, is going to be September 21st. And you received a volunteer, an email asking for sign-ups, I think it was yesterday, so please sign up for that. There's several slots still available, so we hope you'll fill those soon. I am really excited about this next one. Just like I think yesterday, I got an email about our district grant request that we sent in about due August 26th, so just days ago. And we got our results. Our club was granted a total of $6,346. We got all of our guaranteed grant request money and $600 of the $1,200 for the discretionary grant. And I have to tell you that all of our money was spent. The reason we didn't get it all is because there were a lot of requests. The most anybody got was half, and a lot got less than that, but this really will be very budget friendly for us, and we can do all the projects that we have listed there. So I want to say again, thanks to Edie Sneeden and to Linda Du Bois, and also to Linda Ireland. All of you worked so hard to get these in, and well done and on time. So let's give them a round of applause. This Saturday, we have a need for volunteers to help transport the Rotary Youth Exchange students to various places. We thought we had it covered, but we are now in need of drivers to take them places like the Capitol and the Evel Knievel Museum. It's really an all-day and evening event, but if you have some time, please to do one or another part of those, please see David Beck because he can tell you what's needed. It should be fun and very rewarding, and we need the help. We had a new member induction today, so Alan Cobb, if you would come forward, and Terry as well, Terry Hobbs. So we have announced Alan a couple of times. If you'll remember, he is the president and CEO of the Kansas Chamber of Commerce, and he is a returning Rotarian, so Rotary is not brand new to him. On behalf of the board and membership of the Downtown Topeka Rotary Club, it is with great pleasure that we welcome you as the newest member of our club. We look forward to the friendship that we will share, as well as your participation in many club projects that make our community, country, and world a better place to live. And as a returning Rotarian, you know many of the details about Rotary, so we won't review those today, but we would like to present you with your Rotary name tag, for one. Also, with your Rotary pin, which we hope you will wear with pride. And finally, not quite a bit, also, we have this year's Rotary four-way test coin, and really it's very pretty. We hope that you will enjoy this for a while and then consider passing it on to someone else. It's got the four-way test on there. We also have an introductory package here with a lot of information about our club and about Rotary, so we're very glad to have you as our newest member. Please rise and welcome Alan as our newest member. Thank you. Today, our speaker will be introduced by Ira Stam.
Good afternoon. It is an honor and a privilege to welcome Attorney Matt All to the speaker's podium this afternoon. Matt All will speak to us today about the Affordable Care Act. As Winston Churchill once said, Americans will eventually do the right thing after they have exhausted all other possibilities. Matt All was raised in Augusta, Kansas as a fifth-generation Kansan. He graduated with distinction from the University of Kansas in 1993 and from Yale University School of Law in 1996. He served for 8 years as Assistant Insurance Commissioner and as General Counsel to Governor Kathleen Sebelius. In 2007, Matt Hall joined Blue Cross Blue Shield of Kansas. Today, he is Executive Vice President and General Counsel at Blue Cross. Matt serves on the Board of Directors of the United Way of Greater Topeka. He is an adjunct professor at the KU School of Law, where he teaches insurance law. He is a member of the 2017 class of Leadership Kansas. Matt lives in Lawrence with his wife Ashley and 5 children, ages 2 to 16. As I have heard Matt speak in different settings over the years, I have come to think of him as a bright, knowledgeable, articulate, and compassionate man with a robust sense of humor. I have also followed Matt's travels on Facebook, ranging from Chicago to Western Kansas to Kauffman Stadium and beyond. I have wondered if Matt has a twin in New York City, Matt Lauer of the NBC Today Show. Once a year, there is a Matt Lauer segment of Where in the World is Matt Lauer? Following Matt Hall's travels, I have wondered, where in the world is Matt Hall? Please give a warm Rotary welcome to Attorney Matt Hall.
Pretty broken stage here, but we can't explain it. Thank you. It is a real honor to be here, and it's a great honor to be introduced by Ira Stam. Ira, I don't think I know anybody who shows up more places to speak about healthcare than Ira Stam does. If there's a meeting about healthcare, he'll be there. And he speaks for people whose voices often wouldn't be heard otherwise. And so I have tremendous respect for Ira, and everybody at Blue Cross does. He will occasionally show up to our annual meetings and will say something usually pretty nice, but he often disagrees with something we've done, but we respect him all the more for telling us. So it's an honor to be recognized by Ira. So I fear I can't live up to that introduction. I'll do my best. I was asked to speak on healthcare reform, and so when I originally was asked, I thought, well, I'll just rehash all the political ins and outs that occurred in 2017. And then I thought, I don't want to do that. That's really depressing. Nothing really happened. And you guys read the paper, you watch the news, you know what happened in 2017 in Washington. So I'm going to spend very little time on that at the end. So I came up with this title, Ideas, Reality, and Politics. Those things overlap to some extent, but they often operate independently. And this microphone's having some problems. Like your battery may be dying. All right, I will speak loudly. I can do that. And so I'm going to start by talking about some ideas. The reason why I'm going to do that is what I thought I might do at this time, we're sort of at a pivot point in healthcare reform, is to step back and think about some of the issues that are at play in healthcare reform. What kind of things do we want to solve? What are the facts on the ground? What ideas are at play in healthcare policy? And then I'll talk a little bit about reality, which is the ACA and what has gone on there. And then I'll throw in a little bit of politics at the end. But my hope is maybe to give you a different perspective and maybe even perhaps a greater sense of optimism about where the healthcare system and where healthcare policy is going. So we'll see how we do. And I have to do this in 25 minutes, so please pray for me. All right, let's start with some ideas. So what are we trying to accomplish? Keep talking. Okay, what are we trying to accomplish in healthcare? I think when you boil it down, it's really 2 things. What I would call twin issues of healthcare, and that is availability and cost. So availability is just that before the ACA was passed, for a lot of people, if you didn't get health care through your job and you had a health condition or you didn't have very much money, it might be difficult for you to find health care coverage. And that causes all sorts of problems in people's lives. So that's availability, right? We're trying to make sure that it's available for everybody. Now, cost affects all of us, and that's just that it's expensive, right? And we expect it to be expensive. We want our best and brightest to go into medicine, to do research on health. We want it, so it's going to be expensive. What we need it to be is sustainable, and it's becoming more and more expensive every year, which causes problems all across our economy, for families and for businesses and for Medicare and everything else. So the ACA really addressed this first issue. It addressed availability. It tried to make health insurance available to as many people as possible. It addressed costs, but only indirectly and in pretty minor ways. So let's talk about cost for a little bit. The issue isn't that it's expensive. It's going to be expensive. We're not going to make it less expensive. What it needs to be is sustainable. It needs to grow at the same rate as the rest of the economy, and it has never done that for as long as we've been measuring it. So what you see here is the percent of our GDP that healthcare takes up over the decades. So in 1970, it was 7% of our economy, 7% of our GDP. It began to grow, really exploded in the 70s and 80s. To the point where now it takes up almost 18% of our gross domestic product, and it's still growing every year. If we can make it sustainable, if we can bring down the rate of growth to the same rate as the growth in our economy, as in wages, as in things like that, that's something that we can deal with as a society. So that is really our goal. It's our goal as payers, it's the goal of the Medicare system, and it should be the goal of all of us in healthcare. Now the good news is that we are closer than we've ever been. The real explosion in healthcare costs that made us much more expensive than anywhere else in the world occurred in the 70s and 80s. So you can see that it was double-digit year after year of growth in healthcare expenditures, far faster than the rest of the economy was growing. We're actually fairly close to bringing down the rate of increase. Thank you. See if I can make myself speak more quietly. I'm not yelling into the microphone. So we're actually closer than we've ever been to making healthcare in line with the growth in the rest of the economy. And I actually believe that in the time, I hope that I'm able to spend at least another few years in healthcare, and I believe a decade or so from now, we're going to get it pretty close to the rate of growth in the rest of the economy. And that's going to be incredible news for the entire country. It's going to be better for all of us once we do that, and I believe we will. Now, you may hear, particularly in politics, that we spend more in the United States than any other country does, and we don't get any more from that. And there is some truth to that. We do spend a lot more than other countries do. So this is a data set, a couple of years old, but it's still basically true that we spend about half again as much as the next most expensive country per capita, which is Switzerland. And I can assure you that if you get your knee replaced in Switzerland or in Germany, it's going to be a perfectly good knee replacement. We just spend more in this country on that. But what you have to understand is we launched ahead of the rest of the world in the 70s and 80s. And all of those countries have the same problems with the unsustainability of their healthcare costs that we do in the United States. So, looking at this here, this compares us to other comparable countries. This decade, healthcare costs are growing at a higher rate in all of those comparable countries than they are in the United States. We're actually closer to making our healthcare system sustainable. It is expensive, but we're closer to getting to where we need to be than a lot of these other countries are. And the reason why I say that is that I think it's important in our political debate not to learn the wrong lessons by looking at other systems. I think we need to be careful and thoughtful about the way we reform our healthcare system to make sure that we don't do any damage to it, and then we get what we want out of it. So the issue of healthcare costs and the sustainability of healthcare costs is a worldwide issue. It's not just happening in the United States. A couple more ideas, and we'll get into some reality. So what you have to understand, this is going to, my insurance nerd background is going to start seeping in here. So healthcare, unlike in the past, is almost an entirely insured thing, all right? And I'm defining insurance broadly. I'm not only talking about private insurance, I'm also talking about third-party payers that are public, like Medicare and Medicaid. So back in 1960, we actually paid for most of our healthcare out of pocket, about 56 cents out of every dollar. Even in 1980, we paid more than a quarter of every dollar out of pocket. But today we pay for almost all of it through some third-party payer, either your private insurance or Medicare or Medicaid or some other third-party payer. Now the big change there has been with doctors and retail prescription drugs. So you see we paid for about half of our doctor's payments out of pocket in 1970. It's almost all paid by a third-party payer today. Retail prescription drugs, almost all of it was paid out of pocket in 1970. Today, and this is one of the big drivers in healthcare costs, we pay for almost all of it through a third-party payer. So, insurance nerd lingo alert, here we go. So what I'm going to tell you is that if we want to deal with the problems of healthcare, we have to think about the problems of insurance in any type of insurance situation. And there are two of them. There are two problems that cause actuaries to wake up screaming in the middle of the night. I swear, they will wake up and they will yell one of these two things, all right? The first is adverse selection. So adverse selection occurs when those who expect to suffer a loss, those who think they're going to need to use insurance, will buy insurance and more insurance than those who don't expect to suffer a loss. So if I live in a rough neighborhood and I've got a car that I like, I may buy more insurance for that car because I live in that rough neighborhood, okay? If I have a chronic health condition or I feel like I'm getting sick and I have the choice about whether to buy health insurance, I will very likely buy health insurance because of that, because of my situation. If I don't, and I'm young and I don't think I might need it, then I might not. That's adverse selection. You have to deal with adverse selection in any insurance situation or the pool will fall apart. So that's adverse selection. The second issue is moral hazard. So moral hazard is what happens when the existence of insurance changes the behavior of the person who's insured. So if I have insurance on that car that I really like, and the insurance works really well, I've got a low deductible, the garage fixes it quickly, I might not worry so much about parking it in a garage. I might not worry about that so much. In healthcare, it's different. Nobody is saying, all right, I've got health insurance, so I'm going to go ahead and get diabetes, or I'm going to go break my leg. You know, it's paid for. It's different. It's different in health insurance, but it's just as big, and it's really insidious, and it's really the main driver of the increase in healthcare costs, I would argue, from an insurance perspective. All right, before I say this, let me tell you that I love our healthcare providers. They are our major partners in making this whole system work, and I am not pointing the finger at healthcare providers for this problem. We're all in this together. We have a fee-for-service healthcare system, what my boss would call a dime-a-time healthcare system. And what it does is provide an incentive for healthcare providers to give more care and more expensive care. Because the more care you give and the more expensive that care is, the more revenue you drive. So to the extent that a hospital or a doctor's office is a business, the fee-for-service healthcare system, both in Medicare, in Medicaid, in private insurance, gives an incentive to increase the cost of healthcare, all right? And so if you want to compete down in Wichita with Via Christi Health System, you're going to set up a new hospital, you will very likely invest in technology, and if you invest in that technology, you're going to need to drive volume through that piece of technology, all right? Now, lest you think I am pointing the finger at healthcare providers as the culprit here, let me add a layer to this. You and I as consumers believe, more often than not, that we are better off with more care and more expensive care, even though we might not always be, all right? So let me give you an example from my life. I have 5 kids. Child number 3, we are fairly certain we're 10 weeks pregnant. So we go to our OBGYN, it's really not my OBGYN, it's my wife's, and she says, yeah, everything's great, you know, feels the tummy and does all this other stuff, and says, but I think you might be a little bigger than I would expect at 10 weeks. Do you think we should get a sonogram? So of course the answer is yes, now that you said that. I mean, what could it be? And so this was at Lawrence Memorial Hospital. I assumed, I know that hospital pretty well, I assumed we'd go down the elevator, over yonder, or down the stairs, over to their sonography clinic. But as it turns out that between child 1 and 2 and 3, that particular OBGYN practice had invested in their own sonography equipment, had employed their own sonographer, and what do you know, there's an appointment available in 10 minutes. Fantastic. And so as consumers, I thought, well, we absolutely ought to get that sonogram. And so we went in there, had the sonogram, and you saw the little baby swimming up on the screen. It was wonderful, tears and everything. And I was there, like 99% of me was there, but the 1% of my brain that had been occupied by the health insurance industry said, I'm not sure this is a good use of our healthcare dollars. But the point is that, I don't know what it was, but that's a tiny, trivial example. And now you put that into a more serious health condition where the stakes are so high, and add that up across the healthcare system every day, day after day after day, that adds up. All right, so fee-for-service system, that is the basis of our problems here. All right, so the ACA dealt with adverse selection. It didn't deal with this more difficult problem of our fee-for-service healthcare system. But that is being dealt with across the healthcare system. And so I'm going to just say this and leave this here, because this will be an entire different talk. We're going to solve the cost issue in healthcare. It is happening right now. There's experimentation going on all across the healthcare industry between payers and providers, all across the country. And what is happening is we are changing the system from a fee-for-service system to a system that compensates providers for quality and value. And so you're going to hear terms like accountable care organizations, patient-centered medical homes, or other quality-based metrics that we use to compensate healthcare providers differently than we have in the past. And I believe that we are going to solve this. We're closer than we've ever been. It's going to be because of that shift. The ACA really didn't do a whole lot to effect that, but it is happening. So I hope you'll be more optimistic than you might otherwise. All right, one more idea, then we'll get into the ACA. How am I doing on time? All right. So this shows why it's such a difficult issue to solve. So this graph shows that healthcare spending is highly concentrated. So we spend almost a quarter of our healthcare dollars on 1% of the population. We spend half of our healthcare dollars on 5% of the population. You all look fabulously healthy, and I'm imagining that you don't go to the doctor much because you don't need to, because you look very healthy. So you're probably in this lower 50%. We spend 3% of our healthcare dollars on you and people like you. So the point of this is, we're not spending the bulk of our healthcare dollars on trivial things. We are spending our money on people who really need healthcare. So that this 1%, these are premature babies. This is a mother with metastatic cancer. This is a child with hemophilia. These are people who really need healthcare, and that's why it's as difficult as it is to make it less expensive. Because this is important stuff. The stakes are so high that it's important that we get this stuff right. I think we will. That's why it's such it's a quandary as much as anything. All right. So those are some ideas. So let's talk about reality, such as it is. The Affordable Care Act. So you might have heard there was a law passed in 2010 called the Affordable Care Act. So it's a three-legged stool, right? It's a cliche. It's kind of a classic cliche in public policy that it's built on a three-legged stool. Everything is, right? Well, this one is. It's not a great stool. It's not very well polished, but you can sit on it. You can sit on this stool, but it wouldn't be the one you would necessarily choose. But it's the one we have, all right? So the three legs are as follows. As I told you, what the ACA sought to do was to make healthcare available for those people that I described before. So what they said is that every health insurer in the individual market must issue a policy for anybody who comes to apply for it, regardless of their health, age, so on and so forth. You have to cover all pre-existing conditions. You can't rate somebody based on their health. It must be a community rate. And we're going to expand Medicaid dramatically to cover a lot of people who couldn't afford it before. So it's available, more available. We're going to make it available. What problem might that cause? It might cause adverse selection. So we're going to make it mandatory. So we have an individual mandate. If you don't have health insurance, we'll give you a penalty. That has become somewhat controversial. We also have limited opportunities to enroll. So you either enroll during the open enrollment period, or you have to be special enrollment period during the year. You can't just decide mid-year to get health insurance. If we're going to make it mandatory, we better make it affordable. So the third leg is that there are subsidies for low to moderate income Americans, and they're flexible. So if you make less money, you get a bigger subsidy. If you have a higher cost policy, you happen to be in an area where health care costs a lot of money, we will give you more of a subsidy. And then there are cost sharing reductions for people of very low income so they can reduce their deductibles and so forth. And on top of it, we will put a consumer-oriented marketplace to make it easier to shop. So there will be an exchange, so a website where you can go and compare apples to apples. We'll standardize the benefit levels so you can compare platinum, gold, silver, and bronze, and so forth. So that's the ACA. Now, what happened? Well, there was a really rocky start, as you I'm sure remember. The website didn't work. It was a pretty big mess for a while, and I think that undermined confidence in the law. I don't think it's ever been quite the same after that rocky start. It's hard to know. You can't really replay history and see what things would have been different had it gone really well on day one. So it started in a difficult way. It's actually a lot better now. If you go to the website, it's really not bad. I mean, there's some consumer tools that help you shop, and it's okay. It's not a bad website. 8 million consumers signed up in 2014. A lot of those people were uninsured, said that they had been uninsured beforehand, so that lowered the uninsured rate. 12.2 million signed up, or estimated to have signed up this year, which is a lot lower than what they anticipated. They expected 20 million when they first passed this law. What hasn't happened is that the group market has not declined as much as people thought it might. What they thought was a lot of small employers might send people to the exchange, but they didn't. They by and large kept their small business policies in place. And then almost 12 million people have been covered in the states that did expand Medicaid under the new Medicaid expansion. So a lot of people, most people who are newly insured were insured because of the Medicaid expansion, not because of the exchanges. All right. So let's say some nice things about the ACA first. All right. It has provided financial assistance to a lot of Americans, which has allowed a lot of Americans to be able to afford health insurance who couldn't afford it before. That is something. That's a good thing if you're one of those Americans. It has made health insurance available to millions of Americans. So here are some numbers. So today, roughly 10.3% of Americans are uninsured. That is still high by global standards, but by American standards, that is as low as it has ever been since we've been measuring it. So whatever else you think about the ACA, that is a fact, and it has covered a lot of Americans. And the third nice thing I'll say about the ACA is that people who have coverage under the ACA tend to like it. All right, so this is just one data set. By not quite 2-to-1, people who have ACA coverage say that it has benefited them. You might notice that it is starkly different between Republicans and Democrats, so which is often the case in today's world. But people tend to like it, so they feel like they've been benefited by the ACA. Now, you'll be shocked to hear that there are some shortcomings. It's not a perfect law, so let's talk about those briefly. There have been dramatic rate increases in some states in some years, including in Kansas. So what happened there? The problem is that the risk pool has been much sicker than anybody anticipated it would be. So as an insurer, what you got the first year was a chance about 9 months in advance to guess what the risk pool would look like. How healthy will they be? How sick will they be? How many people will sign up? And then you were locked in for that entire year. So if you get it wrong, you're stuck for the whole year. Same with year 2, 3, and 4. And what happens almost universally across the industry, people underestimated how sick the risk pool would be. So here's a graph. I love graphs. This is for 2015. This doesn't look that different, right? It doesn't look that different. So red is poor, people whose health status is that they report as poor. 4% compared to 1% in other individual coverage. That doesn't look like a big difference. But remember the concentration of healthcare costs. You have 4 times as many people in the ACA market that report having poor health than in any other individual market. That makes a huge difference. And so a lot of companies in the first few years lost, lots of money trying to cover people under the ACA. So you had dramatic rate increases. A lot of insurers have dropped out as a result. So rather than raising the rates, they just decided, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'll concentrate on the group market, and so they drop out. So what you see here, this is 2016 to 17. In 16, you had 85% of insurers had 3 or more insurers to choose from. In 17, it's 57%, and 21% only have 1 insurer to choose from. In Kansas, we've always had 2. So we've always been in that middle column, and I think we will be for 2018. And then third, it's still controversial. So if you're going to be the solution to such a big problem, the proponents of this solution need to be able to convince enough of the country that this is the right solution, and that has not happened yet. Even within the Democratic Party, this law is controversial. Now, what you can see is it's a little bit more popular than it used to be, but it's been really back and forth over the course of time. It's been as unpopular as 53% in July of 2014. Now it's at 52% popularity, but that's still not an overwhelming majority compared to what people think about Medicare or Medicaid or lots of other things. All right, so if this is going to be the solution, there's a process of politics and persuasion that needs to occur to make this the right solution. All right, so I'll call this attempted reality. What did the Republicans try to do in 2017? So I'll just touch on this. I've only got a few minutes left. Okay. So 2 bills, I'll kind of coalesce them into one basic approach. Now what they didn't really try to do was repeal and replace, because they couldn't, because they wanted to use the reconciliation rules, so they could only get 50 votes. They couldn't, so they couldn't change a lot of the market rules. So we'll look back at our stool here. On availability, what they did was more or less keep a lot of the rules here, subject to some waivers that were available, but they were going to phase out the Medicaid expansion and actually shrink the Medicaid program overall. All right, so that's one big thing they were going to change. They were going to eliminate the individual mandate. They were going to, in its place, put some penalties in for lapses in coverage. And then on affordability, the big change was that the subsidies were going to be smaller, and in the House version, they were going to be essentially flat, so they wouldn't flex based on income or on the cost of your policy. And so if you happen to be a lower income person in a high cost state, the amount you get from the subsidies would be dramatically smaller. And then on the consumer-oriented market, a few changes around the edges, but the big one is they were going to phase out the metallic levels. All right. So the CBO did not like this bill. So they said a few things. They said that it would increase the number of uninsured by 24 million over 10 years. That initially rates would go up because of the elimination of the individual mandate. So some of the healthy people would drop out of the pool. That eventually rates would go down, but it's not because they bring down the cost of healthcare, it's because the demographics of the pool would change. Particularly older, lower income Americans would be forced to drop out of the insurance pool, which demographically would bring down the losses in that pool. So that's that, and then it would lower the deficit by about $337 billion, or $1 million over 10 years. Okay, so this is one quick example. So look at this lower income couple, two people making $25,000 in Mobile, Alabama, just as a specific example. Under the ACA, their subsidy for health care would be $27,000. Under the House bill, it would be $8,000. So that's when the CBO looked at that and said, those people will not buy coverage, which is probably true, if nothing else changed. All right. Okay, now politics. Where are we politically? And then I'll pause for questions. I may have to just wait after for a question. I'm happy to do that. So, one thing I think we can say, at least I feel very certain about, is that those 2017 bills are not coming back. I think it was a really unpleasant experience, especially on the Senate side. You guys saw the same news stories I did. John McCain held his hand up and thumbs down. I don't think the Trump administration or either the Senate or the House leadership want to go through that again. So that's probably gone for now, and maybe for good. But what you may have noticed is that there is a bipartisan coalition starting to form to try to stabilize the individual market, to try to make sure no more insurers drop out and maybe bring some insurers back. And they're talking about doing a few things. First of all, is to fund those cost-sharing reductions. So the Trump administration has threatened to cut those off. If I had more time, I'd talk to you about the lawsuit that has caused that to happen. But there's a lawsuit out there that's trying to challenge the constitutionality of paying those cost-sharing reductions. And what they want to do is fund those to make sure that everybody knows that those cost-sharing reductions will be paid. They want to provide states with more flexibility. There are a lot of state proposals out there to try to free the insurers within those particular states from some of the restrictions of the ACA, to try to bring more insurers in the marketplace and try to improve upon the framework. So they want to make that easier for states to be able to apply for those waivers and be able to make some of their own rules within the framework of the ACA. And I think that's actually a really good idea. What we need is more experimentation. That's one way to get that done. And finally, there is some talk about funding reinsurance. So that's just, you know what reinsurance is, of course. That's what sort of stop-loss policy for really high-cost claims. Again, remember the concentration of healthcare costs. If we are to socialize some of these costs in some way, that may be the place to start. And actually, the Republican bills often included a significant amount of money for reinsurance, for those types of things. And so that may be some area of bipartisan compromise where both Democrats and Republicans can get behind something that can lower healthcare costs. So let's assume that happens. I don't know what the next step is. Honestly, I usually feel like I have a pretty good feel for where American politics is going on this issue. I honestly don't know. The Democratic Party is very different today than it was in 2010 on healthcare. Their debate is entirely different, particularly after the 2016 primary, where Bernie Sanders got so much traction. The Republican Party, I think, feels very burned by the whole process. The Tea Party movement, all the repeal and replace talk, and then what happened this year, I don't think they probably want to touch it. They have other things they'd rather do. So it wouldn't surprise me, if I had to guess, I don't have a crystal ball, if I had to guess, it wouldn't surprise me if nothing happens for a while. And you know what? That's probably okay for now. What I hope to leave you with a little bit more optimism, is that all of us who are working in the healthcare space, in the public space, in the private payer space, in the healthcare systems and doctors' offices, that we will be able to work together in kind of a stable system for a while to continue this experimentation with quality-based and value-based reimbursements so we can get closer to solving the problem. I think I might be an outlier, at least in the people who talk about healthcare. I'm a lot more optimistic than most. But I really believe that we're getting closer and closer to solving the problem. So if they do nothing, that actually may be the best outcome of all for a while. So that may be anticlimactic. It is. That's fine. Usual anticlimax here in healthcare for a while. All right, 2 minutes left. You probably need to do some final announcements or do any questions? 2 minutes?
Sure, go ahead.
Oh, any questions?
Bernie Sanders campaigned on a single payer plan. What was that all about?
So Bernie Sanders is, that's where he comes from. He believes in that sort of solution to public problems. He's very open and honest about it. I think he's answering the wrong question. So the question he's answering is if this were right after World War II, we had a political situation that liked socialized economic solutions, and the healthcare sector was 5% of our economy, how might we pay for it? That might be a reasonable solution. That's not where we are. And I don't think trying to impose that on 18% of our economy is a great idea. But that is where a lot of people in the Democratic Party are right now.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes, I would like to, when you showed that one graph where it would bring down the subsidies for the low-income people.
Correct.
I didn't see a graph that either showed what has happened to the middle class in their deductibles. I mean, that pushes it all back to the providers.
Sure.
Because they're not going to pay it.
That's one of the surprises people have with the ACA is that deductibles are actually, the cost share is actually pretty high. It's absolutely
More than high.
Yeah.
More than high.
Higher than high.
And I didn't see you mention, the middle class on there. You just pointed to the poverty.
Yep.
It's not, that has got to be addressed.
I would be happy to come back again and talk about even more issues on it, but you're absolutely right. I don't disagree with anything you just said. Are we, any more time or?
One more question.
One more question, okay.
The Republicans talk a lot about the importance of being able to sell across state lines.
Yep.
Has that, explain why that's
Not
would
happening.
be a good thing or not?
So in 1970, that might have been a good solution because there actually was a fair amount of difference between the way health insurance was regulated from state to state. And so their idea is that there's a lot of inefficiency because it's hard to sell insurance in Kansas and then sell insurance in Colorado, Nebraska. It's just not the case anymore. The health insurance is more or less regulated the same way all across the country. We have United, we have Counsel, we have all these plans that offer all across the country. If Blue Cross and Kansas wanted to offer coverage in Colorado, the last thing we'd be worried about was the regulatory barriers. We'd be setting up a network, we'd be doing all the other things that you have to do. So I think they're just answering the wrong question at the wrong time. Sort of like I think Bernie Sanders is answering the wrong question at the wrong time. So I think people are looking for an easy answer to this, and I don't think there is one.
Okay, so you don't think that whatever they're talking about doing there
I think
actually is a benefit to lowering costs?
I think if they passed it, it wouldn't have a negative effect, it would have no effect.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much.
Excellent. It's our tradition, rather than to give you a gift or an honorarium, to send a book to a local school. We'll ask you to sign it before you leave. The other thing is, I would like to give you also this rotary four-way test coin to use or to pass on, and a pamphlet about our club. And if you would consider, I would love to invite you to membership. I will be your personal sponsor. Thank you. Next week, we will be meeting off-site at the Shawnee County Public Library. Gina Mills staff will be talking to us, and lots of good things to hear there. We do need you to register, as usual, so you can do that online. And today I'll leave you with a thought by Anne Frank. How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. So let's stand and say the four-way test plus one. Of the things we think, say, or do,
it is the truth. It is fair to all concerned.